Hey guys, I'm just experimenting here with the live function of my YouTube channel. I was just downtown here in Annapolis, did my latest episode of the channel about the news that came out today. This Colonel Larry Brock, Air Force Colonel, retired, Air Force Academy grad, fighter pilot. He was the guy who was photographed on the floor of Congress wearing the sort of tactical helmet and the body armor, which is actually a plate carrier. It wasn't full up body armor. But he has been identified by Ronan Farrow in an article, and Twitter has just been on fire today with all kinds of opinions and stuff about what should be done. But as I said in my episode today, as we start to see the profiles of those who conducted the insurrection, some of them are the usual suspects, you know, the QAnon types, the guy with the buffalo headdress and the makeup, and the shaman guy, and some of them have been identified as neo-Nazis and agitators. But then others, like this Colonel Brock, just by virtue of his pedigree, if you will, doesn't seem like a guy who would be involved in this kind of thing. So the MAGA phenomenon has been unique. As I've said in a previous episode, I saw the early start of it way back in 2001. So I've been a lifelong Republican since the 80s. Voted for Reagan in my first election. And, it was interesting to watch folks from what normally would be different political parties become Republicans. I remember going to this thing called Talk Fest in 2001, right after my first novel had come out, and just surprised at who was there in terms of who was in the audience. It was a very working class, blue collar crowd, very passionate, selectively informed, and very opinionated. And so, when you think Republican, conservative, or when I did think Republican or conservative in that year or that era, you think William F. Buckley and, of, God and Man at Yale and so forth and so on, National Review. You don't think NASCAR. And so that's also the first time I saw Laura Ingraham, and I watched her work the crowd, and she'd hit these talking points and push these buttons. It's the first time I heard somebody sort of talking about the troops in this abstract kind of way. And at the time I was an active duty commander, and I'm kind of thinking, who is it she's talking about that the government is ignoring? And this was in Hampton Roads, Norfolk, a military town. So I just remember thinking, what is she talking about? So again, this was 2001. Keep going. Tea Party comes into town under the auspices of fiscal responsibility, which seems, okay, that's right. Let's not waste money. Seems right. But that was just sort of a Trojan horse for what ultimately was MAGA. So, and let's remember that the Tea Party was led by the likes of Ted Cruz. And the circuitous path that that movement took in the last 4 years is interesting, and a lesson in political survival, opportunism, all kinds of things. So here we go. The end of the Trump presidency was an event that Monday morning quarterbacks are saying, "Oh, we could have predicted it," right? But I mean, I've been a Trump critic as long as anyone. Look at all the stuff that I'd said on XM radio during the summer of 2015. I was on Julie Mason's show a number of times. She was asking, what did I think? And I'd been to the RNC. I'd seen the B League that he had working for him, especially in the veteran space. And I just commented, I think we're just bored this summer. And that's why he's winning these primaries. And, there's no way that he can ultimately beat Hillary. Not that I'm a huge fan of the Clintons. And I was wrong. And then there was this expectation that once he puts on the clothing of president, riding around in Air Force One and meeting with foreign leaders and having responsibility for the fate of the free world, he'll knock off the reality show and he'll get off Twitter. We actually thought that when he won the election in November of 2016. And obviously we were all wrong. So fast forward 4 years from that time. And then along the way of the campaign, with all the stuff that states were doing to try to allow people to vote in the COVID-19 environment, that was their motivation. They were reading, meaning the GOP was reading, as ways to break the law, their own laws, bend election rules to throw the advantage to the Democrats. So he telegraphed what he was going to do in the event that he lost. Trump's always criming in plain sight. And his moral compass is so messed up that at some level he believes that if he says it, that won't make it illegal or unethical or immoral. So he predicted, or he announced months ago, that in the event of a loss, he was going to attempt to upset the national apple cart, as it were. And he did. So in parallel to his rhetoric from the bully pulpit are his followers. And they're not all one size fits all, of course. They're everybody from, as we said at the outset of this live hit, hardcore QAnon types to people in your neighborhood that really didn't like Hillary, don't like Joe Biden, don't like Kamala, hate the idea of AOC and the squad for valid policy reasons. Because what gets lost in this never Trump TDR, TDS kind of thing is there are some supporters of Trump who are that flavor because they actually like what he's wrought politically. Judges, China trade policy, making NATO pay for their part of it, getting us out of Afghanistan, if that's actually going to happen. arguably he would lay claim to preventing a nuclear war with North Korea. And before COVID, as he has touted many times from the podiums and at rallies, the greatest economy ever. So I don't want to paint with too broad a brush. However, in the face of his actions across, and I don't just mean last Wednesday, I mean across the 4 years he was president, for me, it's impossible to decouple the policies that were created and the outcomes from the behavior, the conduct of the man. I can't decouple those things, as some have proved willing to do. And I couldn't do it early on. I mean, I was a Republican, and I'm trying to remember when I did it, but it, sort of in the summer of 2017 timeframe, so disgusted by the president's conduct that I changed my party affiliation, not to Democrat, but from Republican to what we call here in the state of Maryland, unaffiliated. So that brings us to what happened on Wednesday, which is also, remember what happened a couple of days before when he was down in Georgia. And he was sort of starting to lay the groundwork for what was going to happen on Wednesday. And he'd done it with tweets, see you on the 6th, go wild. And then he teased it out when he was, under the auspices of endorsing Kelly Loeffler and Perdue. He was talking about, just wait, we got a lot of tricks up our sleeve. It's not over. And then on Wednesday, now many news personalities and pundits have made this an infamous series of statements. He said, it's no time to be weak. And he said, we're marching to the Capitol. And apparently his staff had talked him out of that idea some days before. And so he was never going to march to the Capitol. But the MAGA faithful did, led by Boogaloo Boys and the Proud Boys and the hardcore QAnon types who had always announced that this was going to happen. So some of the less radical among the MAGA faithful have said, I never meant to go in there and smash windows and steal Nancy Pelosi's podium and tear down the American flag and put up a Donald Trump flag. I never meant for anybody to get killed. So now in the face of all this footage being publicized, TikTok videos, Facebook live hits, selfies, all kinds of other homemade footage. Each bit of it gets more and more shocking. With that, people realize that if they didn't intend to be part of an insurrection, they now de facto are. So jobs are at stake. If your employer sees you in a screen grab, you could well lose your job. If you live in a nice community and say you're a community leader or a small business owner, like that one lady, what's her name, Jessie Chubb, that lives in Midland, Odessa area of Texas, owns a flower shop apparently. And she now has been all over the web doing a what looked to be a Facebook Live hit. And, people with thumbs ups and hearts. And she's like, we're really doing it. Freedom. And now in the context of the disruption, the destruction and the death, these people are trying to back away in terms of their legal exposure, their status exposure. But it's too late. You know, it's sort of in for a penny, in for a pound at this point. So this gets back to Lieutenant Colonel Larry Brock, U.S. Air Force retired, former fighter pilot. Again, that guy more than any others I've seen, Buffalo headdress guy or whatever, is seriously in my head because his profile isn't an abstract to me. If you say radicalized QAnon person from Iowa who works as a first responder or a law enforcement person or is unemployed, you know, former parolee, blah, 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 right? All of this stuff. I'm like, okay, yeah, I don't know anybody like that, but it makes sense to me that that person would be radicalized. You know, had an alcoholic father and was, you know, racist and just grew up in this all-white community where they hated Obama and think everybody wants a handout and they're pissed off at the entitlement state, how they got left behind. Of course, they have 2 cars. Everybody's got cell phones. They got all the digital channels. And so, in fact, to that point, there's this one picture of this lady who flew her private jet. This is part of grievance culture, right? The people that got left behind during the Obama years are flying to DC to participate in this march in private jets. Right? It doesn't really resonate with me. I'm sorry. So Colonel Brock is now in the headlines. If you go up Google and you start to type Larry, his name pops up. And then there's a whole bunch of articles about him. It started with Ronan Farrow's article in the New Yorker, because yesterday I'd seen the evidence that was kind of being pieced together where somebody said, okay, I'm turning this over to the FBI. It was a screen capture of him. And the person said, this is what I know. Service Academy graduate, didn't say which one. Senior ranking officer retired from Texas. So I'm looking at that and I could see the body armor or the plate carrier and the patch, and I'm zooming in. It was kind of blurry because this was I don't know if it was, you know, security camera footage or what. But it looked like airborne assault wings. So based on that, I'm sort of going, okay, Army makes sense, Pompeo, Esper, Flynn, you know, class of 86, Mafia, in the Trump administration, probably another West Pointer that got, you know, let's just say radicalized. So I went up Twitter, I was like, hey, West Pointer's on my feed. Anybody know this guy? And then somebody later in the day said, I don't think those are air assault wings. I think those are Air Force pilot wings. I look closer, I'm like, oh, okay. So I said, let's open the aperture. Air Force Academy grads, do we know who this is? And then overnight, the Ronan Farrow New Yorker article came out where he had identified, you know, Lieutenant Colonel Larry Brock, U.S. Air Force retired. He's wearing, among the patches, he's wearing this 906th Fighter Squadron. I'm sorry, 706th Fighter Squadron, which is a test and eval squadron at Nellis Air Force Base. So this is the real deal, man. I mean, they fly F-16s, F-15s, F-22s. I'm sure they fly F-35s. I don't know if Larry Brock has any F-35 time, but he was a jet pilot, fighter pilot, TAC Air. So that's my peeps, right? So it's not an abstract when you're talking about a guy like Lieutenant Colonel Brock retired. So I sort of demand answers about his journey from normal guy in the squadron, and maybe he was never normal, maybe that's the wrong word, but, you know, reg following, not hazarding the safety of his squadron mates and himself when flying the airplane. I mean, if you make it to lieutenant colonel, you're doing something right. Not to mention, if you make it through the Air Force Academy, you're doing something right. Right? I mean, we're seeing this now at West Point with this cheating scandal. So I need to know more, and we'll see what happens. So another question that is being asked in my circles is, okay, is the Air Force Academy Alumni Association going to do what the Naval Academy Alumni Association did several months ago when one of the Alumni Association members inadvertently went up Facebook Live and started saying a bunch of racist stuff in a conversation he was having with his wife? Really vile. This guy had been on the regional board of trustees, very active. I know his brother very well. He's a classmate of mine. Same day, the president of the board of trustees of the Alumni Association yanked this guy off of the Alumni Association. So it was swift, impartial, unflinching action. So has the Air Force Academy Alumni Association done that yet to Colonel Brock? I don't know, all innocent until proven guilty. Yep, got that. I'm talking about where that is not the burden of proof. Organizations like the Alumni Association. His employer, is he a community leader back in Texas? Because let's be honest here. This isn't just a guy who has strong political views. This is a guy that participated in an attempt to overthrow the government, an insurrection. And as more and more information comes out about what was the Proud Boy intent, what was the Boogaloo intent, it was very violent, murderous intent in terms of what they, if they got their hands on a lawmaker, what they were going to do to that lawmaker. So what should happen to Colonel Brock with respect to retirement? As I said in today's episode, he makes upwards of $50,000 a year as a retired 05. That's a lot of taxpayer money that he's using to attempt to overthrow the government. So isn't it ironic that a guy who's willing to go to the lengths that he has because he doesn't like the way things go, but he's cool with accepting the check that he gets every month? That's the kind of hypocrisy that's going on here. So I've been nauseous and heartsick since Wednesday. I want justice. I want to see a congressional commission that runs this to ground. I tweeted today that I want to see our law enforcement go after all of the perpetrators, like Mossad went after Black September. And I don't mean extrajudicial killings. I just mean rigor. So for me, the poster child for the wrongdoers, for the insurrectionists, is Lieutenant Colonel Larry Brock. And I want to see justice to the full extent. I want him to be a cautionary tale to anybody else with his pedigree that thinks it's permissible to do what he allegedly has done. Because so far it's not looking good. And it's a mystery to me how a guy who comes from a similar background as me can be radicalized to the degree that he has been. I mean, I see classmates on Facebook with some pretty vile points of view, but none of them were part of that broke into the Capitol and destroyed the place. Now, the other thing I pointed out a couple episodes ago that's kind of the good news bottom line in terms of the process and the Constitution is what all of the efforts did by the insurrectionists in terms of how it netted out, actually sped up the process. Because if you look at the knowns and the predictions going into Wednesday, it was anticipated there would be objections to 6 states, the battleground states, the contested states. So each one of those would take 4 hours. So there's 24 business hours. That doesn't count time to walk from the office buildings, the Cannon and the Longworth office building, back to the floor to render the vote. We saw some of those delays later in the evening on Wednesday into Thursday morning. But so imagine that times 6 times more, because Ted Cruz was trying to pull his little stunt where he wanted a commission, like what had happened in 1877. Again, look at my Bulwark editorial and look at my Ted Cruz and the GOP's Last Stand episode for the details around that. But that was going to further delay the approval of the counting of votes process. So it was going to take through Friday and maybe longer. Well, as a function of the insurrection, the suppression of the insurrection, and then the reformation of Congress later that night into early the next morning, it only took end to end 14 hours. And that doesn't count roughly what? I mean, they were out from about 2 or 3 until 8. So about a 6-hour interruption, right? So thanks, Trump loyalist, insurrectionist, you sped it up for America. You know, I'm sure that wasn't your intent. So the guardrails held, as we say, but we got a lot of work to do here. All right. Didn't get any questions here. I don't know how many folks we have. Look, I'm showing 1. So this was just an experiment. So to whoever the one person is, thank you. And we'll try this again another time. This is the first time I've tried this. All right. See you guys.